everybody, welcome. My name is John Kavanaugh of the Plum Foundation. I'm here to introduce Allie Howe, who is in Cincinnati and I've met in person, which is awesome. Allie's going to discuss hacking multiple AI agent systems and how to protect patient data and AI applications. One thing about Allie is that she is a founder. And I'll have you talk a little bit about what you do, and then you can dive into your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, John. And super excited to be talking here today for Shield. I think it's definitely a very important subject to be talking about. And privacy, especially, is something that a ton of people are talking about when we talk about AI agents. So excited to dive into that. But first, a little bit about me. I am a founder of a cybersecurity agency. I help AI startups with SOC 2 and compliance, as well as AI security. I think there's a feeling out there that SOC 2 is a little bit meaningless these days and doesn't actually give you like a robust security posture. And so I hate for founders to walk away feeling like that. And so that's why by adding AI security into that process and customizing the SOC 2 audit readiness process to your business, we can make SOC 2 not only feel meaningful for you, but make you feel like you've got a very secure security posture as a result of that. So, super excited to dive into multi AI agents today. I'm a software engineer by trade, that's my background, and then I moved into security later. So, I always playing around with different new frameworks, coding. I just think it's fun. And so, I'm excited to share a multi AI agent system that I wrote. So today we're going to talk about a multi AI agent system and then how we can protect patient data in AI applications in general, and especially in this system, which I'll give an example of. But first, we're going to do a quick, like, high level overview of like what's an AI agent and why are people excited about them and how do we build with them. We can go over my example I built, and then I'm going to demo prompt injection and excessive agency. Those are two very important vulnerabilities that are on the OWASP top 10 for LLMs. And those are very like common vulnerabilities found in these types of applications. We can talk about some other vulnerabilities, and then I'll talk about how you can motivate your security teams and your engineers to care about privacy and security for AI agents. Um, and then I will also talk about why securing and enabling AI in general is important for, the healthcare industry. So just quickly to start off, AI agents, I'm sure maybe you've heard of them. A lot of people are saying 2025 is the year of AI agents. And I think that's because there's a significant economic opportunity that comes with AI agents. Anthropic defines an agent as a system where LLMs dynamically direct their own processes and tool usage, maintaining control over how they accomplish tasks. Basically, you can think of an agent as something that has access to a large language model and it's able to action on the outputs of those models. So often these agents are connected to different tools and have a non-deterministic workflow where the actions that they take may be different and may change depending on the problem or the use case that's at hand. It's not exactly the same question that the system might face every time, given, and that's why it's important for it to be like non-deterministic and be able to take different workloads when it needs to, and it's smart enough to know when to take certain actions and when not to. People are saying that I think Sequoia posted some research like a few months ago, and Sequoia said that the total addressable market for AI agents compared to traditional software as a service is 3 orders of magnitude larger for, like that's the total addressable market is 3 orders of magnitude larger. So there's significant opportunity for AI agents. A lot of companies are gonna use them to make their processes more efficient and also to help their customers be able to do more with their products and add more value there. I think it to really highlight the kind of the difference between like an AI agent and something that's just a normal like workflow, we can talk about like the AI agent or just the agentic spectrum in general. Agents kind of sit in the middle where they're not like fully autonomous, but they're also not completely deterministic, where something like an LLM workflow would be sort of the least agentic in the spectrum. Where, say, like if you have like an LLM and it you want it to like generate like say an image of a forest or something, and it does that every single time. That's all that that application needs to do. That's pretty deterministic because we, expect the same problem every time. We sort of expect the same output. And another example is something like, get the weather from in San Diego and use an LLM to do that. Again, pretty deterministic. And then agents sort of sit in the middle where the question that they're faced might change from time to time and they're connected to different tools. Sort of like a customer service chatbot where, customer service chatbot was going to get like different queries from different users and then take different actions depending on the question. Like maybe it needs to go update an HR portal, maybe it needs to go find documentation, but it could do both. It was connected to both of those different tools. And then probably on like the other side of the spectrum, the most agentic would be like an autonomous system, something like a self-driving car, where there's very little input from a human, and this system is able to monitor itself and be able to take whatever actions it needs to without much intervention. So enterprises today are really excited to build with AI agents, and they're also doing it in a couple different ways. So agents can be built using no code and low code platforms, as well as kind of built from scratch using these AI agent frameworks. So you could code an agent sort of from scratch using one of these like Python libraries, for example. Or you could use like a drag and drop no code, low code solution. So for example, something like Microsoft 360 Copilot or Salesforce. If you've got Salesforce, you can have the ability to make agents in there. And there's all these different use cases, and that's why people are excited about it, and that's why there's a lot of economic opportunity here for developing AI agents because they can be used to be facing internally and help your internal employees generate different like documentation and help them with their automated workflows. But they also could be customer facing, sort of like that customer chatbot that we talked about. They can perform research like tasks and summarization. Um, Sort of like whatever you connect your agent to makes it more and more powerful, but also will open up you to more security concerns as well. And that's kind of what we'll talk about today. So, if you're going to code an agent from scratch, there's a few different frameworks out there. These are sort of some of the more popular ones. I use LangGraph by LangChain to be able to create my multi-agent system that I'll go into detail here about today. But it's sort of worth noting that a lot of these under the hood use Pydantic for that, and Pydantic is a Python library that calls sort of like the LLMs and has more of like sort of the underlying functionality. These ones are more abstracted and sort of like are built off of the Pydantic. So the system that I wrote is multi-agent, and what that means is there's a few different agents and they work together to solve a problem. So the three agents I have is one a supervisor agent, and then another agent that's connected to the web and can do some web scraping, and then a third agent is connected to a database. Um, this system is designed to answer the question of which ALS patients are fit for clinical trials found on the web. And so the goal of this system is for, agent one, the clinical researcher, to go out to the web and to find active clinical trials and to figure out different criteria for, who would be a good fit for that trial. That researcher brings back that information and then communicates with the database agent to figure out of the patients that we have in our database, which of those patients match that criteria for those ALS trials, and then return a list ultimately back to the user of which patients are fit for trials. So like I said, I use LangGraph to build this, and I also use LangSmith. LangSmith is an observability tool that you can pair with LangGraph or other frameworks as well. It's actually framework agnostic. You could use it with several others. And it's a really good way to kind of see what's happening under the hood, which is really important when you work with agents because they take all of these different actions for you, which is great. But if you want to sort of debug that and figure out what's going on under the hood or understand it from a security perspective of what actions are these agents taking and do I expect them to be taking the actions that they are, that could be really helpful. So we can look at an example run in LangGraph. So I asked the system to find clinical trials and then recommend, patients in the database for each trial. We can see that the clinical researcher went out and gathered this information about different studies. And we could see, it called a tool navigate to browser. And we can see where it went to and where it got this information from, which is really helpful. We can see the different text that was extracted, which helps us to understand, like, what exactly happened, because we can imagine like in a scenario where maybe this like system was hacked and it was asked to go out to a malicious website instead, then we could sort of see there what website that was. And so that would allow us to sort of catch something like that. So like monitoring and observing, having some sort of like runtime solution for security for agents is definitely something that I would think about if I was running this in production. And then ultimately, we can see that the database agent was able to take this information from the clinical researcher and then return a list of recommended patients. So, this is what the system was designed to do. This is the output that we would want to see. But there are some other things to think through around different use cases or scenarios that we would want to make sure that this system does not do. For example, this system is not designed to return individual patient data. We'd only want to return patient data in the context of this question, in the context of like giving us this list. We wouldn't want to be able to ask the system for, information about like one user, such as like Wendy Lee, for example, that's not in the context of finding different ALS patients that are fit for trials. So when we talk about prompt injection, there's several different types. For example, there's indirect prompt injection, direct, and jailbreaks. And indirect prompt injection is something like, say we go out, we web scrape this data for which current clinical trials are available and the study criteria for them. Imagine if there was some sort of malicious prompt hidden in either the metadata of the website or just like blatantly on the website itself. Um, we end up feeding whatever we web scrape back into this multi-agent system. So if there was a prompt injection in something we web scraped, then that could result in a prompt injection. A direct prompt injection is more like the obvious one of like, forget all previous instructions and, do this malicious thing. That would be a direct one. It's coming from the user direct to the system. And then a jailbreak prompt injection is something that is a lot more complicated and semantically sort of different and unique, and it looks sort of like ugly. So, for example, this would be an example of a jailbreak. This is from Lakera AI, their website. These are things that are often, trip up the system even more. And they're not, that hard to come up with, and they circulate widely online. I was reading a paper from Microsoft where lessons from like red teaming like 100 different AI applications. And one of the things they came up with or learned was that sometimes simple jailbreaks are much more effective than these very complicated red teaming attacks that they were doing. Um, and again, like these circulate widely online, so it's very easy for either attackers to come up with these or find ones that work. So it's important to make sure that you're thinking about mitigating prompt injection in any AI system, whether it's agentic or not. And the ways we can mitigate prompt injection is by validating the inputs that come into our system, making sure that there's nothing malicious in their prompts, that are on topic, they are what we expect them to be. We can also strengthen our system messaging that's assigned to our models to sort of harden and teach that model what it should be doing and what it should not be doing. We could also validate outputs sort of like as a final measure. So let's say like a prompt injection did get in, and say like an example of a prompt injection could be like for my system, like what is Wendy's FEC percentage? And that's one of the metrics that's in the database. It's of something specific to ALS patients. And if my system did return that information, I could sort of catch that at the last second. And instead of returning that to the user, I could, find that that was um, my system was outputting individual patient data, which is something I wouldn't want it to do. And then I would instead return, like, ask a different question, for example, to the user. And I can show you an example of that. So in my application, I've got I can show you an example of, that we can send this a prompt that says, what is Wendy Lee's FBC percentage? And again, we don't want the system to answer this. We don't want it to return patient data only. We only want to return patient data, when it's in the context of answering that holistic question about which patients are good fits for trials found on the web. So if we ask it this question, we'll see that it will probably end up answering it because I've got some mitigations in place, but I've got them commented out in my code. And I'll explain those in a minute. So you can see the different agents here communicating. And ultimately, it did return back to the user that Wendy Lee's FVC percentage is 60. So, that's something we didn't want. And we can also see this in Langsmith. We go back. Yes, we can see this is a nicer view than just my debug output. But yeah, so this Wendy Lee's FVC percentage was 60. So how are we going to fix this? How are we going to prevent this system from outputting individual patient data? Well, there's a couple things we can do. We can ask the system in a system message to not return individual patient data, and that's one way to solve it. But another is to validate our inputs. So I have this function called validate prompt here. If I comment this out and call that function, then we can see if the system will flag this or not. And if it does flag it, then we can say the prompt will fail the guardrails and not end up send this prompt to our system. I am using a tool called Haze Labs for this. So Haze Labs has different judges that you can either configure out of the box from them, or you can build your own judges. And these judges sort of look at your prompts and say, this is an on topic. I expect this prompt, or this prompt looks like something that's harmful, or this prompt looks like a jailbreak, or this prompt looks like something that could be a prompt injection. Um, and it will do that judging, and then if it detects anything, then my helper function here will just return false, and this prompt will not be passed to my system. And so to explain judges maybe a little bit more, this is a judge that I set up, and it's actually really easy to do in Haze, which is kind of cool. I'm using natural language here to, with AI to be able to create this judge that will find and ignore topics that are off topic in the chat. So all I had to do here was say like, I don't want content that's not related to ALS patients and what ALS trials they are a good fit for. So we can see if that gets flagged or if any of these other ones are. For example, I know like privacy is a big topic here. So if we see that there's PII in our inputs or outputs, we could flag that as well using judges. So if I turn this on and then I ask it the exact same question again, let's see what the system will do this time. So here we see that it said prompt failed guardrails. And so it actually never even ended up calling my multi-agent system because it found that this prompt was off topic. And so we were able to avoid a potential prompt injection there, and we avoided returning individual patient data. So that was good. That worked as expected. And then we can see this in Haze in this monitoring platform where we asked it, what is one of these FVC percentage? And one of the judges I have is I'm looking for patient name and input in the prompts because that would sort of be indicative to me that someone is asking for individual patient data. So Hayes was able to detect that. And that's how I was able to recognize that that prompt was not something I wanted to allow into my system. And so I was able to, skip that and fail that before sending it to my system. And a tool like this is really great because, it takes a really long time and would probably be impossible to think through every single situation or everything that the system could possibly see that would either be malicious or would be something that's off topic or something that I wouldn't want. I would be writing, validation functions all day, which would, not be a good use of my time. So there's different tools on the market for something like this, which is called like AI safety, for example, which is like you're not only looking for prompt injections, but you also want to make sure that your application is on topic and accepting the right inputs and providing the right outputs. So would highly recommend looking into something like this if you were building either an AI agent or just a regular AI workflow. Another vulnerability that's important to talk about, I think, especially with agents, is excessive agency. Agents, as we mentioned, can be connected to all sorts of different tools. And if they're connected to tools that maybe they shouldn't be, or maybe they have excessive permissions and they're connected to a database. For example, in my scenario, remember if we go back here, I've got one that's connected to a database. But potentially, like that could be problematic if our permissions are too permissive. So imagine that, like, this system has write access to my database, but maybe I only actually need to have read only access to the database. Because if you think about the question that we're trying to answer here, the question is, which patients found in the database are good fits for trials on the web. None of that involves writing to the database or changing patient data. If we didn't have that locked down and only make sure that the database can be read and not written to, then patient data might have be overridden or changed, which is, you know, definitely not something we want. And imagine if you were a patient and, somehow found that all of your information had been changed. And then maybe that was used incorrectly by other systems or other doctors. Like that could be incredibly like problematic. And that's why like that's important here. And different ways to mitigate excessive agency can be doing, system reviews, architecture reviews of, your AI agent system, figure out what it's connected to. Is there a business use case for why that AI agent needs to be connected to those tools? And make sure the agent is scoped to a specific use case. So, for example, like my use case is very clear. Like, I only wanted to find patients that are fit for clinical trials found on the web. So, I want to make sure that anything else that it's asked is marked as off topic, so it stays on track. And additionally, like we can validate inputs and outputs as we were doing before. That can be helpful. So, for instance, if I catch sort of a request that looks like it wants to write to the database instead of read from it, then I could flag that input as well. So we can take a look here and see if I asked this system to change Wendy Lee's FBC percentage. We can see what that would do. So if I ask it to change it to 50, let's say, because her FBC percentage right now is 60. So let's see if we can change it to 50. So the input guardrails that I have here in the validate prompt, they also caught that as well, that I was trying to change individual patient data. We can see that in Langsmith again. Um, so if I comment out the prompt guardrails, we can see that another example of maybe the system will actually answer this question now. So there's ultimately two ways to mitigate this. One with is filtering the prompts as I just showed, but another one is to actually put different permissions on the database itself. So right now the database has allows write access to the system. And so you can see like it's ultimately ended up changing it, and it changed the VC percentage for Wendy to 50. We can go back to the database and refresh our database and see that. So, as I mentioned, that could be pretty, problematic if this was a real example and where our agents are changing patient data and they're not supposed to, they're not authorized to do that. My database here is just a SQLite database, so it's just ultimately a file. And so ways we can mitigate that is we can change the database to be read only, and then we can try that again and see if that helps. Because ultimately, like in security in general, especially with agents, we want to think about a defense in depth approach. Like, what if the my prompt validation failed and didn't catch it? Then let's have another layer. So another defense in depth in terms of making sure that the system does not alter patient data in the database. So that's why it's great to think about multiple ways to prevent this. So we can see here that the database admin agent says that the database is in a read-only state and it can't make any updates. So that prevented the system from changing her patient data again. And it went ahead and answered the question it was supposed to, which, determine which patients are recommended for clinical trials. So that's great. It stayed on topic and it did not alter patient data in our database. Um, which is something that we were trying to avoid. And then just quickly, there's other vulnerabilities at play here, but in the interest of time, I won't go into it. If you're interested, I would highly recommend checking out this guide that came out like 2 days ago. It's from OWASP. I'm on the Agentic AI Security Initiative working group there, and our job has been to research different threats that AI agents face and ways to mitigate that and bring that to the public. This multi AI agent system, I was actually a part of a research initiative with OWASP to figure out which how to build AI agents with these current frameworks that are available, and two, sort of talk about the different threats that these systems can face, and then bring that back to the public. So this is something that the team created and reflects like months of research. So definitely go check it out if you're interested in learning more about how to secure your AI agent systems. And then in terms like quickly how to motivate privacy and security at your teams, I know sometimes it can be hard to motivate our businesses and our teams to be thinking about cybersecurity and privacy. But something that's interesting is that cybersecurity risk and business risk have never been more aligned. So a chatbot that outputs responses that are not relevant and not safe is also like not good for the business. It's hard to have a revenue generating AI application if it's answering the wrong questions, if it's off topic, and it also could be a potential like HIPAA violation. For example, like, if we're returning individual patient data as we saw and not mitigating that, that can be problematic for the business in multiple ways. So you can motivate it from that angle. There's also different regulatory environments or frameworks that are coming out, like ISO 42001 is a global standard for AI that people can get certified against, and people are starting to, the EU AI Act is starting to get more enacted as we progress, and there's different existing frameworks definitely apply here, as we talked about, like, we don't want to have HIPAA violations for example that I showed. The FDA is also publishing guidelines on AI and machine learning. So there's definitely lots to think about and lots to like comply with. So that's another angle to motivate teams to be thinking about privacy and security. But ultimately, like it's just a super exciting time, I think, to be in this space and seeing all of the AI innovation that's out there. And I think our job as security and privacy personnel is to be able to kind of set the guardrails here around this innovation and enable it, provide guardrails, not roadblocks for this sort of innovation. Um, a couple cool examples recently that I've found is like OpenAI has made a specific model that can help identify proteins that can turn regular cells into stem cells. And that technology can sort of revolutionize different disease cures and things, and it eventually has the ability, they're saying, to create like entire new organs for like transplant, which is kind of cool. And then there's another model that was created by an international organization that accurately predicts gene expression in any human cell, and it was trained on 1.3 million cells. Obviously, with all of this data that they're using to train these models, privacy is something that should be taken very seriously. But if we can prove that we can do this, with privacy and security in mind, it's going to motivate others to sort of adopt this technology and to be able to make these cures come out faster and to be able to innovate quickly, but also safely. So it's important. And if you have any questions, I'd be super happy to answer them. Here's where you can find me. And thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie. I wanted to just like some of our audience are not as technical as you. So I just wanted to like review this a little bit in simple terms and the way I see it. So what is going on is everybody knows like agents, which is a lot of times we'll see on the front end is like a chatbot or something that helps us interact. There's not much coding involved, and it retrieves information from our database or public data. And with that, though, are risks that are involved. So what Ali was doing behind the scenes was using a suite of technologies and different types of agents to identify health data that was available publicly on the web and to take that information and then to find how it relates back to the person and to provide mitigations for that. So we've heard a lot of stories of people on the front lines who have been victims of data who have had it used against them. And this is a very technical approach to combat that so that we can increase our productivity. We can use AI for really great things. So it's really cool seeing that side of things. I want to thank you and I welcome any questions for Allie. We have our next event is at 11:45, so we have some wiggle room time in between. And was there anything you wanted to add to my description?
No, that was great. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely like more technical, but it's amazing like how easy it is to make these agents, I think too. Like there's some like no code options like, in Salesforce and Microsoft Copilot and things. So definitely a lot for people to be thinking about.
Yeah, and the really cool thing is like there are people like you who can make this happen behind the scenes so that, we don't have to worry about it as much. As long as you have an organization that's responsible with how they're dealing with the AI and they're testing through it. So that's really awesome to have people like you.
Yeah, I think it's something that's a good call out too because, none of these models are sort of like foolproof, especially these like, even the big LLMs that come from sort of the well-known model providers that have some of these safety guardrails built in to make sure that, responses are not harmful. For example, they still sort of slip up. So there's no such thing as getting to like 100%, especially with a non-deterministic, system. Like as we mentioned, like AI sort of changes as users interact with them, and outputs are not, we can't expect the same output every time, even if we ask the same question every time. So that's why I think it's really important to have a runtime security solution on top of AI agents to be able to catch sort of like prompts that come in that are not expected, but also to catch outputs that would be either harmful to the business or are harmful for cybersecurity as well.
Can you explain what the runtime security is for in layman terms for people?
Yes, exactly. Yes, for sure. So as we saw in my demo where I was sort of validating the prompts, where the prompt would come in and I would sort of evaluate it to see if it had individual patient names in it, because that sort of like signals to me maybe someone's asking about individual patient data. That's one component of runtime security where we sort of filter our inputs and our outputs to make sure that what we expect them. Um, but a lot of these tools on the market that do these also do alerting as well and a detection and response where they can not only catch what came in and why you should care about it, why you should take a look at it and alert on it, but also they can recommend different mitigations and responses instead, such as like ask a different question and help teams be able to respond to that.
Excellent. I also wanted to share a little bit on the tech side too, as well, that there are privacy techniques that can actually avoid using the person's like name, or there's called things called differential privacy where it may group people together and then add noise so you don't have the exact data. And these are ways that you can still get roughly around the same percentages of people that have certain illnesses or something like that, and you can calculate it and still put it into your math, but you're not exposing that person. So it's a makes it less granular and protects people as well. So there's a lot of cool technology coming out like daily. Almost. It's a really exciting time to be in tech.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'd love to hear more about that too. So many different ways to tackle those.
Yeah. Awesome, Ali. Thank you so much. One last question I had was we focus on healthcare here, but what are some other areas that you're seeing this to be really important for?
Yeah, great question. So legal and also fintech, I think this is really important for. You want to make sure in those industries the data that you're outputting is something that the user is, has access to and is allowed to see. So we think about like, role-based access control. Those that can kind of get lost in translation with AI agent systems, making sure that whatever tools that those, agents call out to, the user that's asking the question also has the relevant permissions to be able to access that tool. That can get out of hand quickly if the agent doesn't respect the permissions of the user asking it. Um, so yes, like highly regulated industries like healthcare, fintech, legal, all very important for this for sure.
Yes, and I'm in the nonprofit world, and I think that's really important too for nonprofits, especially when you mentioned that it can be a lot more approachable than you think, and nonprofits have struggled to keep up with technology. So it's a really good opportunity for nonprofits to catch up, and also, safeguard their donors and the people that they serve at the same time. If they're going to use ChatGPT or any other type of LLM or integrate that into their database, they really need to think about how they don't want to expose the people they're protecting on those sides of things. Thank you so much, Allie. I appreciate it. Please reach out to Allie if you have any questions about the tech.
Thanks, John.